the main presentation that I'll present today comes from Cole's book on storytelling with data. And so we'll walk through storytelling with data process and how you can transform your visualization to actually tell a story so that your audience can easily understand what you're talking about, what you want to suggest. And so, yeah, these books are on Amazon. I highly recommend them. So why is data visualization important? So I have some guidance from the 3 books. And this is the viewpoint of each. Effective data visualization talks about how we as humans are visual by nature. We skim, we don't want to take in a whole lot of data at once, we want to find out the most important part. Data points talks about how you can't really find a trend in data by looking at a table all the time. You need to visualize it in different ways so that you can find the patterns and trends. And you guys as data scientists probably know this full well. Storytelling with data talks about that there's an actual story, some actionable piece of information. And your tool, no matter whether you use Excel or R or Tableau, any tool doesn't actually know the story that you want to tell. And so that's why data visualization and figuring out how to represent your data is important. So most of my findings, one of the most striking things to me as I dive into data visualization, trying to understand it, is the difference between exploratory, and I call that finding stories, and this is what data scientists do a lot, versus explanatory data analysis, which I call telling a story. And so I'll just explain a little bit about the differences. So there's an analogy for finding stories, exploratory data analysis, to your wedding day, right? If someone asks you, how did your wedding day go? As a groom or bride, you have one viewpoint. But if you really want to know how the whole wedding day went, then you look at the wedding photos afterwards. You see, are people happy? There's lots of different camera angles. And so there are lots of different viewpoints. And so you might have lots of different visualizations when you're trying to find a story. You ask questions about where the origin of the data is. How was it recorded? What does it actually mean? What is the underlying pattern? And then when someone looks at your visualization, if it's exploratory in nature, then they come away with a lot of questions. You become more interested. Hypotheses form, and then you want to test those. And on the other hand, when you tell a story, when you're telling a story with a visualization, with data, then you have a single viewpoint. You just focus on that viewpoint, and you think about how to organize your data to tell your story instead of thinking about how it was organized. We assume that you already understand that. And then your visualization should suggest some action. It should be action. So another analogy is, say your boss told you, find pearls and seashells. And so the exploratory way you do that is you go and you look through hundreds of seashells. Now, does your boss care about the 100 seashells that are empty? No, your boss cares about the one seashell that had a pearl in it. And so oftentimes as data scientists, we go through complicated methods of finding interesting facts, and we want to show the sophistication of how we came about our answer. And that has a place. But when you want to suggest an action, then you don't necessarily want to show the 100 seashells because that'd be hard for people to understand. And so I hope you guys can remember this. And I will point that there is an arrow here. And so this happens before this. So sometimes we get confused and we think simple means that you're telling a story. So you can see this number up here. There are fatal crashes, and this is a decade worth of time, it's 300,000. That's it. We don't know what to do after that. We know some information, but that's not exactly a story. And so that's where exploratory visualization comes in, right? And so we come up with a visualization and we figure out this is the same data, but sliced on a different dimension and plotted on the visualization. And so now, well, we notice different things. We can actually find stories from this data. And you come up with hypotheses. Like, why is the East Coast, why are there more car crashes on the East Coast? Is there, just East Coast drivers are just really bad? Or is it because of snow? We don't know. And I will say that this in itself also does not tell a story. we don't know what to do. We come up with more questions afterwards, right? We want to know, is it because of snow? Is it because East Coast drivers just never went to driver's ed? One other cool thing about exploratory, we're still talking about finding stories here, is that it helps you have that great aha moment. And so this picture, what it shows is a guy, he had a camera, a long exposure camera, and he took photos of fireflies in the forest. And then you combine all those photos, and now you can see kind of the path, the trajectory of a single firefly throughout the forest. And that's kind of a very innovative and cool visualization. And you wouldn't find that in Tableau or some other in R. It'd be hard to do that. So that's what exploratory visualization can do for you. It can help you find these cool stories. But when you look at this, do you know what he's trying to tell you? Not exactly. You can find a few interesting things and say, oh, they actually do swerve around trees, right? They kind of follow this path. But from first looking at the visualization, you don't know that that's what the author of the visualization is trying to tell you. So the rest of the presentation we'll talk about how to actually make that meaning. How do we go from finding stories to actually telling stories? And we'll use a lot of visual cues here. And so we'll use some before and after to help us kind of understand. So this is a chart from one of the books. One of the authors of the books, she worked as a consultant. And so what she would do is very smart people would come up with interesting facts, but then they need to make business decisions. And they need their data to affect the business decisions. So they say, hey, can you help me transform our visualization into something that can move the higher ups so that we can make a decision? And so she'll walk us through the process. So this is the before. And here you can see lots of different information. This is parents versus students. And you can see that in general, mostly the students care more about eating a well-balanced diet, being active, except they don't really care as much about attending college. But when you first look at that visualization, it's kind of hard to figure out that that's what the point is, right? You can figure out other things. Maybe you focused on, just the overall difference that parents just don't really care as much. So with a revamp of the visualization, this is a slope graph here, and some highlighting, taking advantage of some techniques, you can more easily tell a story. And so here we say, surprisingly, students have lower expectations to go to college than their parents. And so what we'll do is we'll walk through how she came up with the transformation of not just this chart, but charts in general. And one of the first pieces is the story itself. So this is a real life example. And so in this example, the client came back later and said, actually, that's not even actually the story we want to tell is that this number is low. 58% of students expect to go to college. That's all. But we had all that extra data in there that didn't really show what the story was. So in short, it's a process. So the first step is to get the context. We need to formulate the story. We need to understand our audience and figure out what the story is. We need to then figure out how to pair our story with an effective visualization. And there is some guidance from the first book I talked about, effective visualization. I pulled some guidance from that for us to go over. And then removing clutter. This is the concept of there's a lot of extra things that could be in your chart because of your tool. For instance, if you use R, it might put extra labels and extra things in there. You might want to get rid of that stuff so people can easily understand what's going on. And then focusing your audience attention. This part is kind of interesting because it brings in scientific research from psychology to figure out how people think, how people see, how they perceive. If you understand how your audience perceives, you can more easily direct their attention. We talk about pre-attentive attributes and things that in cognition that you can use. And then we talk about just some principles of design as well. And we'll learn from some examples just from people with experience. We'll talk about a few examples. So the first point, understand who your audience is. Is it your boss? You know, is it just a friend you're trying to suggest some action to? The second point here is suggesting an action. This point is really, it seems simple, but it's something we don't actually do. We, as data scientists, sometimes we say, oh, I just want to present all the data and you figure out what you want to do with it. But why would you leave it up to the audience to figure out what they want to do with it when you know the data best? Why don't you just suggest what you think should be done? And you're the most qualified to do so because you've done the research. And of course, we always prove our point with the data. It's correlated to the data. And in terms of formulating your story, you guys probably heard of the 3-minute story. If you have an elevator pitch, if you guys were in an elevator with the CEO, what would you say? And this comes into play when you have a visualization. You can add one sentence to kind of explain what your visualization is trying to say if it didn't tell it by itself. So storyboarding is one of the examples I thought was pretty useful. And so this just helps you actually formulate your own story. So once you come up with your findings, then this kind of can help you think through, you know, what the actual story is. And so here we have this after-school science program. They came up with the issue. The kids had bad, you know, attitudes about science. And then they demonstrated the issue with data, right? They looked at the grades. And then they came up with ideas for overcoming that. They described some program, and then they got collected survey results afterwards. And then they had a recommendation afterwards. And so this recommendation is a very important part about adding to your story, especially in a storytelling visualization. So now we're in the second part. So that was context. Making sure you formulate that actual story. And this can seem like, you know, pulling teeth a little bit. You might think, oh, I don't want to come up with a story, but it does help. And so now when you're choosing an effective visualization, there's a bunch of different ways we can pair visualization with stories. And we'll go through these kind of quickly. It'll be a lot of charts on a page. I pulled some interesting charts, some new charts. I will say that new graphs and visualizations are being made as we speak. People do research and figure out this is a cool way to visualize the data. So these are some new ones for now, and in a couple of years, it'll be even newer. So when a big number or an icon array, what is that helpful for? If that important number is, if that one number is important, you want people to just know what that number is. And so I pulled the example of 58% of students. We all know when we look at that, that's a low number. And I will say that we should probably watch out for overdoing it. Size is, it makes things seem more important, but if everything is big, like in this example here, then we don't know, I mean, it seems a bit too much. And so you want to watch out for making everything big, make the number big, let the data speak. There's some adapted options as well. And so here we have a bar chart. But this isn't your typical bar chart, it's kind of adapted to show one important number. So you can do things like this to tell a story even with visualizations that are not focused on one number. And icon arrays, these kind of add context to what you're talking about. This is, 9 out of 10 customers prefer our pizza, and so you see the 9, this is 10, and these are like pizzas. They look like Pac-Man to me. So this is the most common type of visualization, right? This is how humans understand things. We compare and contrast them. And so one thing I will say that humans, they struggle with comparing. They're good at comparing lengths. So if I give you, if I show you the length of my arms, you can probably tell me if they're the same length or not. But they're bad at comparing lengths when they're not adjacent. So in these, if I told you to compare, one of these bars with one of these bars, you might struggle a bit, especially if they're similar length. And so we want to watch out for that when we build a bar chart like this. We are good at comparing slopes. And so a slope graph is relatively new, and it's pretty useful. There's some other comparative visualizations as well, like population pyramids. This is a nice one as well that I recommend. You have something like a line chart or dot plot, but instead of putting these all in one graph, you just have a series of them. It's a lot easier to compare. relative performance. So this is like, trying to figure out if we're doing good, we're doing bad, or ugly. And so this is the bullet graph, something I had never heard of before reading these books. But essentially, we have a benchmark line. So this is where we hope to be. So we set our goal. This black bar is where we are. And then you see different gradients. And this is kind of just to show the category. This is bad, this is good, this is great. And you can help people quickly understand that, this guy didn't meet his benchmark. This guy set a really low benchmark that's still in the bad area. And you can quickly understand that in the bullet graph. You can have just benchmark graph, which is a bar chart that has just a line to show the benchmark. And that's very easy to understand. And then a combination chart where you have a line chart and a bar chart at the same time. You plot different things on those, on the line chart and the bar chart. So when you have survey results, I just want to check the time really quick. When you have survey results, you kind of want to focus on what people think, what people believe. And so a lollipop chart is kind of nice for this. So you could represent this as a bar chart, but oftentimes the width of this bar just gets in the way. It's just this extra club. And so you can, get rid of that, and that becomes something that looks like a lollipop, and they call it a lollipop chart. So that's pretty useful. These stacked bar charts can be pretty useful as well for showing survey results. And I will say that there are many others. I'll quote a couple interesting ones. Parts of a whole. We'll talk about pie charts. You can use a pie chart. In general, we'll talk about some guidance about pie charts. Heat maps are great as well. Tree maps are good for hierarchy. And so they can be good for hierarchy. They can still be, I don't know if you guys can see this, but it kind of just explains, who this is Corey's group, this is Barry's group, and the whole thing is Peter's group. So you guys may know about that, I just want to call it out, hierarchy. And then a nested area graph can be a pretty interesting visualization as well. So if you want to show a relationship with respect between two variables, because may use scatter plots a lot, in case you don't know, things kind of are linear. We know it's a linear relationship, and then we go down as well. And that is one of the best visualizations for doing that. You can also just have a relationship diagram, where, so say in this example, this is early childhood reading, and this is test scores in math, reading, and writing. And so you can do things like showing the relationship. This is early childhood, it's strongly correlated to writing scores, weakly correlated to reading, and not really correlated to math. And this is reading to test scores. And then sometimes you just don't want to visualize this sort of relationship. You might want to just say it in words. It might be easier to just say it. So watch out for those types of visualizations. So sometimes you might have qualitative data. And I pulled the example of the fireflies picture. Picture is worth 1,000 words, right? It's one of the easiest ways to get your point across. And I will say what you might want to do is spice up this picture and make it tell a story, but sometimes a picture is one of the best ways you can visualize data. And then word clouds, there are many opinions about word clouds, but in general, if the words themselves mean a lot, then you can use a word cloud. There was a period of time where we used word clouds way too much. Everybody wanted a word cloud. Trends. Of course, there's line charts, bar charts. They all show trends, and we use those. The Sankey diagram is very good for flow. And it can be very convoluted to understand if you don't do things like highlighting your point. Deviation bar charts it's just an adaptation of a bar chart, but you can really kind of highlight the contrast between two groups in your presentation, right? When you're trying to tell a story, you're like, oh, supplier A, look how great supplier A is, and then everybody's like, it's not. And so that can happen with pie charts in general. Why? Humans are not very good at determining, from just looking at volume and area. We're just not, when they're very close, it's hard to estimate. Length is easier. but curved lens is not very easy as well. And so for that reason, just avoid 3D in general. Why add another dimension if you're trying to tell a story? Pie charts, you can avoid those if numbers are really close. Avoid this type of use when you have lots of different slices. You might want to limit the slice. And then donuts is even worse than the pie chart, right? You need to determine curved lines and volume area, and then double axis chart we'll talk about now. And so a double axis chart, it doesn't seem too harmful, but it makes you do things like this. This text is vertical, and there's a study that reading vertical text is like 3 times as hard as reading. It takes you longer to read vertical text than horizontal. And also, you can't really figure out which is which axis goes to what metric sometimes. And so something you might want to do is just separate the two. Give us 2 charts instead of having one chart with everything combined. So now we're on the next step, talking about clutter. And the previous example, right, that was a bit cluttered. And so we'll talk a little about clutter. We'll talk about cognitive load. We'll talk about the amount of processing your brain has to do. And then some Gestalt principles of visual perception. And so these principles, I'll just give you some examples so you can easily see. They're pretty easy to understand. And then we'll walk through just a step-by-step guide of removing clutter. So the first principle is proximity, right? You can use white space in charts to help people understand association. You guys probably know that these are 3 groups, or you assume it's 3 groups because of the space in between. This probably looks like columns, and this probably looks like rows. It's the same number of dots, same dots, just space used. And so you can take advantage of that. Similarity, you can use similarity in color, or texture. And so we know that the blue dots are somehow associated, and the gray dots are not, the squares are associated. Enclosure. And so things inside of the box you assume are associated. And this is kind of interesting because these are separated still into groups, but you seem to assume that there's some relationship between the things inside the box. Closure. And this principle just talks about the fact that we tend to close things up. And if I asked you what this is, you probably wouldn't say 8 lines that are curved a little bit. You say a circle, because you naturally just kind of close up the loop. And so this kind of helps you remove clutter because it means that you don't have to always have straight, bold lines. You can have dotted lines, you can just remove the lines sometimes, and our brains will naturally just close the loop. Continuity. So this is an interesting example. So this is the first picture. When you see this, you kind of assume that if we pull these 2 apart, it would look like this. Where you assume that they kind of overlap. You wouldn't really assume that there's a gap, right? And so our minds naturally think like that. And in continuity, even though there's no axis right here, you kind of know that there is an axis. It's just invisible. And so that can remove clutter. Connection. Connection is a very strong principle. Things that are connected kind of overpower the rest. So here we're comparing color with connection, similarity with connection, similarity with connection, and then enclosure with connection. And in my opinion, I don't know how you guys think about it, but the connection seems to win in most cases.
I'll walk out.
So now let's talk about a step-by-step guide for removing clutter. And so this is the original graph. Right? We have ticket volume in a workplace, and we plot it over time. So we have this is the original. So let's take advantage of the enclosure and proximity principles, and what do? You remove the border. So it's a little bit cleaner. Remove the axis labels in the border. Next up, remove the data marker. Right? Where they weren't adding anything, any extra meaning. It didn't help me understand it. Now let's clean up the axis labels. Right? The text is now horizontal, it's easier for me to read, and we abbreviate it. We still understand very quickly what's going on. And so now we label the data directly. This is very useful as well. Sometimes you have a legend, it might be way over here, and we're looking at the data over here, and that kind of takes a lot of cognitive load to try to figure out what's going on. If you label it directly, then we know who line is filed, the number of tickets filed, and the number of tickets completed for it. And here we take advantage of similarity. They have similar colors. So they're consistent. It's even easier before we even read it to know which is associated with which. So now we're directing the viewer's attention. And so we'll talk a little bit about that soon. But if the main point of the story is that these two diverge, then instead of putting numbers for each one, we put numbers here. And so now there's more happening over here, and so we tend to look there first. Now we're telling the story. The number of completed juror tickets for the Aaron's team, this Matt's team, falls below the creation rate for the last 7 months. So ever since May, the number of tickets completed fell. And they just changed the brightness of the colors throughout. And that's a lot easier for your eye, because you have 3 million more rods than you do cones, and so the rods are happy, they can figure out the difference. But then if you have things, websites where you have a blue, bright blue, light, bright red, that might be really taxing on your eye, because the wavelengths for blue and red are very different, right? They're really long in one case, really short in one case, and your eye has to continue to decipher those. And so you might want to avoid reds and blues, and then I put it on the slide, but 8% of men have red and green color blindness. So you want to take that into account as you build a visualization as well. So that's just how you can remove cognitive load and think about color. So now let's talk about thinking like a designer. And so one of the principles of design, and this comes into play with interactive visualizations, one of the principles of design is affordance. And affordance, what that means is that when you make something, you should naturally feel like you know what to do with it. When you see a chair, you don't think like, should I throw this? Or you think, I should probably sit down with this. And so when you build especially interactive visualizations, it'll be easier for your audience to not get confused about how to play with the tool, but how to understand the data if you take advantage of this principle. Make things feel like they should work. Visual context. So this is an example of a real comparison of the different ingredients in coffee, the different variants of coffee. And so this could be just a stacked bar chart, but instead they added this context. They added, a cup and some steam, and so you kind of, without reading any words, you kind of assume that you know that this is kind of talking about some sort of drink, maybe coffee, and then you read a few words and you figure out, oh, they're talking about different types of coffee. So you can add context through methods like this. This is something maybe a designer would do, you wouldn't think a data scientist would do. But if you're telling the story, then you might want to take advantage of these things. So now let's talk about two of the examples that I thought were really important, just rule of thumb when it comes to visualizing. Charts with dark backgrounds, whether we should or should not try that at all. And then how do you apply the storytelling process to animated charts, interactive charts? So which one of these is better?
White.
Black and white, like this?
The white one.
White background, right, yes. And the reasoning behind that is that, your eye has to process. So anything that is not white, it takes a lot more load of your eye to process. So if you have a lot of color, then you're gonna have to, it just feels bad.
Is that relative to the background of the rest of the slide though? Like if your slide were black, would you prefer the black?
Right, that is true. Most slides are white for the same reason, but you are right.
So if it were black, we would prefer the black one? Or is it just universally true that a white background on a chart is better?
Oh, so it's kind of two answers to that. It is universally true that a white background is better. if you had a black slide, then this probably wouldn't look as bad. I will say that, because the contrast is not as big. But in general, white is better. So animated charts. So this is what I wanted to download. Tableau is the software you can download. This is the way they kind of do animated charts. And so you might have, this is your end result. You might have this chart talking about active users online, but they want to walk the user through a story. And so they start with just one piece of it, and they kind of walk you through each step, different frames. So similar to what I talked about earlier with different charts. Now this is the same chart, but you're just walking through a story. So Tableau calls this a storytelling feature. So you can do things like this to help users if the process, the time passing is a very important part of the story. Then you can do things like this for animated charts. And I will say for interactive visualization, it's very simple, right? The data might change underneath, but you can apply the same principles to each frame. And so the storytelling process, you can automate that, and you can have an interactive visualization that also tells the story. So, yeah, I hope you guys found that interesting and important, that you can actually drive business decisions with data. But you can't do it the same way you do research and present charts in the normal data science way. You need to remove clutter. You need to figure out your story, pick the right visualization, remove the clutter, and then you can take advantage of some design principles. That's a few references, and if you guys have any questions?
Can you put the references back in?
Yeah.
So I just came late. I just wanted to know whether it's all done in Tableau or what kind of tool did you use for this?
In two of the books, all of the visualizations were done in Excel, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So at Oath, we recently had a whole day where we did this sort of experiment. Some teams use R. We had a competition. We transformed data visualization from exploratory to explanatory. And some teams use R, some teams use native JavaScript. And so the tool is not the actually important thing. I will say that many tools don't make it super easy to make things explanatory. And so you might have to work with the tool. But once you learn your tool well, you can probably figure out how to change the axis, how to remove the axis, change the color, things like that.
So my introduction to the topic was Edward Tufte.
Say it again?
Edward Tufte and the quantitative information. Regardless,
Okay.
he puts a very heavy emphasis on the ink to information ratio.
Okay.
And so I'm just curious if any of these books talk about that. It seems like a kind of very theoretical idea, but like he was saying, you really want to try and maximize the amount of information you're communicating relative to the amount of ink on the page. And so I'm just curious if that was treated in any of these books, and if so, how.
Okay. Yeah, so I think in these three books, they probably would argue that you want to make sure the amount of ink on the page is low. Right? You want to remove all the amount of information you want to share. And you might want to split it out and tell a story, in an iterative way, instead of jamming a lot of information into one chart. So I think that's the overall opinion of most of these books. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, so specifically, I was thinking of like the coffee cup example, where you took a stacked bar chart and turned it into these coffee cups. I think my initial reaction was like, well, I'm not sure the coffee cups are actually adding that much information for each one, right? And so I was kind of curious, like, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to like find the context or the place to kind of take the information from the presentation to my own kind of mind map. But
yeah, no, that's a great point, right? maybe it's probably not good to put a coffee cup for each one. You might
Big
wanna-
one and all.
Yeah, something like that, right? Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So I think one thing too, I think that what Neelan went through is his stuff is a lot about the explanatory, where you're telling one specific story and trying to get to a point that requires action. Where I think maybe your context, and in this context is applicable a lot too, is it is more of that exploratory thing, where you actually want to present a lot of information to let someone parse through it and actually discover something new. And so you're right, coffee cups wouldn't be useful if you're trying to present like a whole load of data across many dimensions, because the coffee cup is trying to present like one specific slice and angle. So I think a lot of things too, like the way I see these, the explanatory stuff too, if you think about the rise of data journalism and just in general, when you need to present findings that require action, like this stuff is super critical, right? Like anytime that you need to, have something inclusive that then can, get a budget behind it or other things, like a lot of times it needs to boil down to something very specific. But I think maybe the ink to information thing, if you're trying to maximize the utilization of visualization, I think that would play in more of the explanatory when you're, the exploratory, where you're trying to find stories. So I think it's kind of a both and in that case, where I think they both can serve a purpose.
I think it's a big difference in audience. If you're presenting something in a scientific paper, you want to maximize the information that's given. You want it to be clear, but you don't want to leave stuff out. Now, if you're presenting to somebody who doesn't have that background and that interest, like the general public or business executive, then you want to give them just the salient points that they need.
Yeah, that's right. I think too, like you said, for the scientific community, I think there's times where the coffee cup illustration is not going to be enough to get published, right, in the scientific community. But the fact is that can still tell a story that really piques people's interest, but then behind that you might have the more advanced visualization with the data behind it. So that's a good point.
Did everybody hear that? She was talking about that difference in the audience.
So my take on the whole coffee cup thing is that's Time Magazine. If you're presenting to that kind of audience where you really are, I hate to say dumbing it down, but trying to really encapsulate something in just the most simplest possible form with a limited amount of space, to a wide audience, and that's the kind of thing you're looking for, right? But I guess I would suspect that most of the people here are probably starting with something that looks like giant scatter plots and then trying to figure out where to go. So that's the exploratory side of it. That's where we need better tools.
Okay. I thought I saw another hand, but you guys did not.
Questions?
Okay.